Today, Secretary of State John Kerry again in Baghdad, meeting with government leaders, including the Prime Minister and the Secretary of State. He's calling for political reform and saying it's not up to the U.S. To pick new leadership for Iraq. This all coming as the Pentagon announced the U.S. and Iraq have reached an agreement on political protections for American soldiers deployed to the country to advise Iraqi forces. President Obama said the U.S. will not launch airstrikes or send in ground troops here for combat missions. And Sunday, though, wherever you turn the channel in the political shows, lawmakers from the U.S. and other parts of the globe, they all had something to say about the crisis.
Both of these camps are enemies of the United States. And when your enemies are fighting each other, don't strengthen either one of them. Weaken both.
The Reagan doctrine for how we go to war is that you should have a consensus of the people. So there needs to be a full-throated debate in Congress, and Congress has to decide.
If we spend our time debating what happened 11 or 12 years ago, we're going to miss the threat that is growing and that we do face. Rand Paul, with all due respect, is basically an isolationist. He doesn't believe we ought to be involved in that part of the world.
I still can't believe Dick Cheney giving advice on Iraq. But okay, let's bring in our panel right now. And by far the brains of this outfit, Jeannie Zaino, political professor at Iona College and also professor of campaign management at NYU. Dominic Carter, political journalist and author. Tom Doherty, Republican strategist, partner at Mercury, former advisor to New York Governor George Pataki, and Andrew Whitman, our senior political correspondent. I'll start with you, Tom. There's no good choices here in terms of where we go next. For me personally, and I think maybe a lot of the country feels the same way, from a week ago to now, I was like, please, the last thing I want to hear about is Iraq anymore. But you see the situation unfolding, and you see what an unchecked Sunni extremist impact could have on the broader Middle East right now. I don't know what the answer is. I don't think it's as clean and simple as everyone that's opining thinks it is. But I just don't know that we can sit back and do nothing, as unpopular as that is.
Well, we certainly are not going to send troops in, so that's off the table. I think that one of the people had it right is that, and it may be Netanyahu, is that, you know, we may need to step back here and sort of let this thing sort itself out and figure out whether or not the Iraqi people can decide on their own whether or not we want to, you know, sort of make a peace internally, et cetera, or else they're going to wind up being, I think, divided into maybe three separate countries within, you know, the borders of Iraq. The American people are not. We do not want to go back there, and I think that airstrikes lead to us going back there, and so I think that George Will asked a very important question, is that if you say today, is the interest of the United States at risk, and is it worth sending another 4,500 young men and women to their deaths? The answer would be no. And I think that any candidate who speaks in that term would lose.
But Andrew, we're hearing, and I think everything that Tom said is right, but when we talk about refineries getting knocked out, power grids going down, water supply going down, you're already seeing the impacts of this as there's humanitarian crisis, where like Jordan's taking in tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people crossing the border into the country with no intention of leaving. At what point, not that we have to be the moral cop, but do we say, we built all this stuff. American taxpayer dollars funded all these different things. Do we watch them blow up in front of us?
I don't think there's any threshold, even with the humanitarian crisis, that necessitates our going in. I think there's no appetite in this country for doing it. There's no resolve. There's no political will. We're not going in. We'll do what we have to do to try to stabilize things from a distance as best we can. We don't want the price of oil spiking. And we don't want to create a new home for terrorists to eventually launch attacks on American interests, either domestically or overseas. But there is no appetite for really any direct involvement in Iraq, and I don't think we're going to see any.
Andrew's right, but that but matters in terms of we don't want to be able to create, in effect, the next launching point of terror attacks. We don't want this thing to turn into a conflagration in the Middle East. You guys convinced? I'm not so sure the administration is where they were a week ago on this. I think we'll see airstrikes. I don't see how that's avoidable, especially if they get the concessions from the Iraqi government to finally let the Sunnis in, et cetera.
Oh, go ahead, Professor.
No, I was just going to say that, we very well could, but I think this is part of my frustration with the Obama administration is all the questions you're raising. You depend on a president. I'm sorry, I understand there's no appetite in the polling. I don't have an appetite either for going in. But you don't make foreign policy based on public opinion polls. It's important, but you depend on leadership. And this is the problem with the Obama foreign policy doctrine.
No. Didn't he already? But what has he changed his mind on?
What has he changed his mind on? What is his opinion? What is Obama foreign policy?
He said we're not sending any ground troops.
Go back to that West Point speech. Left, right, and center, nobody can figure it out. You're raising very important questions. What are our interests? When do we go in? When don't we? I defy them to come up with an explanation, an answer. I'm not saying they're easy answers, but I'm saying don't look at the American public to make foreign policy. If we have an interest, tell us, and then decide how best to fulfill that. But don't say, I agree with you. We may very well do airstrikes, but we're going to do that in the way it always happens with the Obama administration, which is, this kind of pragmatic step-by-step thing. If that's how you're going to do things, you're going to walk your way backwards.
You just said something pragmatic, like that's a bad thing.
Well, pragmatic is not such a bad thing all the time, but if that's your philosophy, darn well tell us. You look back at that speech, he's saying there's terrorism, that's the biggest threat to the United States. How do you combat with it?
At the end of it, I wasn't sure what he said, but Dom?
Yeah.
It's inevitable. I think I agree with you and Jeannie as far as this part, Professor Zeno, that airstrikes are inevitable. When you consider that what the U.S. involvement in Iraq, it is my contention the U.S. has no other choice. You can't just sit idly by, but I agree with this side of the table, as we've been saying for about a week now, there's absolutely no appetite. Americans don't even want to hear the word Iraq. So when you consider 4,500 killed soldiers, 32,000 wounded. So I don't see
I don't want to. I got to go to a break here.
Yeah,
I don't want to get into the
case.
politics as much of it, but it's going to be interesting if this summer, if Republicans get in a box where they either have to support more military intervention or not, if the McCains of the world and the Cheneys of the world, if they keep pushing it, and then they have to say yes or no. Democrats are pretty much universal.
You got to give Cheney credit. He's like Houdini. Start the mess and then criticize the president after you. Start the mess and then criticize the president after you.
Wait,
and it's all his fault.
Dominic, that's a little bit, that's easy to say now, okay? Let's go back to September.
Cheney wasn't pushing this from day one?
Let's go back.
Cheney wasn't pushing. What happened to weapons of mass destruction?
Go back to.
What happened to that?
Listen. Bill Clinton said there were weapons of mass destruction there. Many people said there were.
Did Bill Clinton go in?
And look, wait a second. His wife voted for it. Harry Reid voted to go in.
Whose wife voted for it?
Who's
Clinton? Right, and it cost her the presidential election.
But
You're proving my point, Tom. She voted for it, and it cost
Dick
her
Cheney
her
didn't push
political
the button
career.
and we went in. There was a vote by the United
Dick Cheney
States
pushed
Congress.
President Bush
The United
so much that President Bush started ignoring him.
It's easy to go back 10 years, but the point is that let's be honest about this. When Bush left office, we can honestly say that stable Iraq existed. It was in a very decent place.
Until we left.
Okay, but wait a second. Isn't then the job of the president to monitor that situation? Be honest.
Unlimited resources while Americans are losing their jobs back home and starving and being put out on the street?
Those are nice talking points. They sound good, but you're president of the United States. Aren't you, like me, like all of a sudden woke up one day last week and said, what the hell just happened in Iraq? Why is that the American people, seriously,
I'll give you that.
I don't know anybody who didn't go, ISIS, Iraq, what the hell just happened here?
I'll give you
I'm
that
just
one.
saying
I'll
is that
concede that
it's
one.
always easy to look back,
Tom,
and I think Cheney should shut up about this.
That Cheney got us in this mess. I just conceded you a good point.
But again, I didn't view it as a mess when it happened, okay? I viewed it that we had a dictator there who was part of, I believe.
Dictators all over the world.
Okay. I think we were also, it was like pick which door you're going to use for a rationale.
I agree
at
with
the
that.
end. Okay, listen, I think we also forget the president campaigned that he was going to get troops out. Now, I agree that the president has to change maybe, but he fulfilled his promise to the public that he was going to get us out of Iraq.
It was an inane promise. You don't promise to get troops out until you know the situation
And
on the
you're very
ground.
happy to know you got the last word.
As I
When
should,
we
Richard.
come back, the U.S. Supreme Court telling New Jersey sports betting is not allowed. So why are lawmakers, including one state senator we're going to hear from in a minute here, more confident than ever that sports betting will come to the Garden State? We'll speak with them straight ahead.